Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rob's Movie Reviews. As you can see, I'm in a different location right now. I'm traveling and I'm a little late getting this video out. Now, I was having a little trouble deciding what I wanted to review this week. I've been holding off, wanting to get a little closer to Halloween around the 1st of October before I really kicked in doing horror movies because I like to try to be as diverse as I can on this channel and discuss all kinds of films, even though horror films are my absolute favorite genre. But I just decided, what the heck? Halloween's still a long way off, and I've really been itching to get into it. So I'm going to start the countdown to Halloween a little bit early. I know we're only about mid August right now, but I'm going to go ahead and jump into it, and I want to start off by doing a 3 video series, a 4 video series on Dracula, one of my all-time favorite horror characters. I'm a huge fan of Dracula movies. There have been literally hundreds of movies made with the character Dracula, several dozen of them retelling the traditional Bram Stoker tale from his novel. And I want to discuss the 4 best versions of Dracula put to film that are of the traditional Dracula story, based mainly off of Bram Stoker's novel. And I'm not going to do them in the order of my favorite to least favorite or vice versa. I'm just going to do them chronologically as they were released. And when we get to the 4th installment of this series, the last installment, that's when I'll reveal which one I personally like the most. But let's start out with the 1931 version, the one that started it all, starring the legendary Bela Lugosi, Dracula. You can see I got it in a nice little 4 movie collection here. I ordered off of Amazon. It also comes with Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, and Creature from the Black Lagoon. I'm a huge fan of all the old Universal horror films. Love them to death. Now, like I said, this film was released in 1931. It was directed by Mr. Todd Browning, who would go on to be very active throughout the golden age of the Universal monster films. Unfortunately, later on that same year, another director would come along and direct a masterpiece that would pretty much catapult him to the stratosphere, and he would overshadow Todd Browning throughout the rest of the golden age. And I'm speaking of the great James Whale, but we're not going to go into him right now. I'll save talking about him for when I get into my series on the Frankenstein films. But this film, like I said, it stars Bela Lugosi in the main role as Count Dracula. It also stars Dwight Frye, one of my favorite old time actors from the Universal horror age, from the golden age, as he plays the role of Renfield. He plays it so well. He's so over the top, but it works so well with the way the story is presented. I absolutely love his version of Renfield. He's brilliant. Also, the Edward von Sloan as portrays Dr. Von Helsing in this film. Him and Dwight Frye both, along with let me see, what was his name, David Manners, would go on to be permanent staples in the Universal monster films throughout the golden age. They would appear in quite a few of the movies, a lot of times together, as well as Lugosi. Of course, he was one of the main staples. Him and Karloff were the 2 main ones, the 2 front stars for the Universal in the earlier half of the golden age of the monster movies from the 1930s into the 40s. The film also stars Helen Chandler as Mina. Now, I'm believe she appears in a few more Universal monster films. She wasn't as predominant in the series as Edward Van Sloan, David Manners, and Dwight Fry, but she did do some other work during this period. This is, like I said, a retelling of the Bram Stoker novel. Some liberties are taken, not as much as another film that we'll discuss during this series, but some liberties were taken. Some characters were omitted, of course, I'm sure for budgetary reasons. You know, the budgets weren't there back in the 1930s like they are nowadays, so they had to cut the cast down, use fewer sets. I believe the film is based off of a stage play that was written in the 1920s that Lugosi appeared in quite a few performances. This is a wonderful movie. I'm sure you've had to have seen it. If you're a horror movie fan, you've had to have seen this film. It's been featured on so many late night creature features and weekend horror fests. This movie has been shown to death on television throughout the years, but it never gets old. It's a true classic. It stands the test of time. For the most part, the acting in this film is pretty solid. There's a few people that are a little weak, but like I said, this is in the 1930s. A lot of people were new in the film industry back then and were still playing roles as though they were in a stage play, and movie acting is quite a bit different. It took a while for Hollywood to really assemble a huge stable of actors who were more adapted to doing film. But this is a great movie. It set the bar. This is the movie that every Dracula movie after it is measured by. And Bela Lugosi, whether he's your favorite Dracula or not, that thick, strong Hungarian accent, whenever somebody wants to talk like Dracula, it's always, I am Count Dracula. They're imitating Lugosi. It's just kind of the given official voice of Dracula. Hundreds of different actors have played him. None of them spoke in the same manner as Lugosi, but everybody, when they talk like Dracula, they imitate Lugosi. It's almost cliche. He was the first and definitely one of the best to ever play the role. Universal would make many, many movies during that period with Dracula, and oddly enough, this was the only time other than in the, I believe in the early 50s, I'll have to look this up and give you a more specific year later, but Dracula made his last Universal appearance during that era in the comedy Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which would only be the second time that Lugosi would darn the cape and play the role of Dracula. There were other actors that played him. Lugosi would move on and do other parts, but he would, like I said, finally there toward the end of the Golden Age, would do Dracula one last time with Abbott and Costello. Now, if you haven't seen the 1931 version of Dracula, you have got to watch this movie. You can't call yourself a true fan of Dracula or even vampire movies, period, unless you see this film. You've got to watch this film. There were other vampire movies that came before this one. There was Nosferatu, the German expressionist film that was a silent picture that came about 15 years earlier. But this is the film that really shot vampires into the mainstream of pop culture. Lugosi will forever be remembered as Dracula. Like I said, so many other actors have played Dracula, some of them multiple times, but Lugosi is the quintessential Dracula. He is the gold standard of Dracula. And with that, I'm going to wrap up this review, and join me back here next week when I'll have the second installment. I'll be reviewing the 1958 Hammer Studio film Horror of Dracula, starring Christopher Lee in the title role. And until then, you all take care.